beyond the boundaries of reality, where imagination weaves dreams into existence. Welcome to Storylight. The village of Duskwood nestled beneath a canopy of ancient trees, where sunlight rarely touched the ground. Superstitions ran deep here, and every child was taught to heed the old tales. Beware the forest's whispers, and never stray beyond the lantern's glow. Maren, a restless 17-year-old, had always questioned the warnings. She found comfort in the forest, where the silence seemed less daunting than the rigid rules of the village. Her mother, a stern herbalist, had no patience for Maren's curiosity. But Maren couldn't shake the pull of the woods, nor the dreams of shadowy figures calling her name. On a chilly autumn evening, the village held its annual Lantern Festival, marking the boundary between safety and the unknown. Lanterns were lit along the forest's edge, and villagers danced around bonfires, casting shadows that seemed to flicker with a life of their own. Maren lingered at the edge of the festival, gazing into the trees. Something moved, a faint shimmer, like moonlight on water, weaving through the darkness. A voice followed, soft but urgent. "Maren, come closer." She hesitated, her heart pounding. Then, as if in a trance, she stepped beyond the lantern's glow. The forest air felt colder, heavier, yet alive. The voice led her to a clearing, where an ancient stone altar stood, cracked and overgrown with ivy. Upon the altar lay a dagger, its blade black as midnight, pulsing faintly as though it had a heartbeat. As Maren reached out, the shadows around her coalesced into a figure. Tall, robed, with eyes that burned like embers. Maren of Duskwood, the figure intoned, "You are chosen." Maren froze, her hand inches from the dagger. "Chosen for what?" she asked, her voice trembling. The figure stepped closer, its presence both menacing and strangely comforting. "A pact must be made. The balance of light and shadow is crumbling, and the accord demands a keeper." "The accord?" Maren echoed, the words foreign and heavy on her tongue. The figure explained, centuries ago, the forest and the village had struck a fragile truce. The villagers were granted protection from the darker forces that lurked in the shadows. And in return, one of their own would serve as the accord's guardian. This duty had not been needed for generations, but now the balance was failing. "The forest calls to you," the figure said. "You have always felt its pull. Take the blade, and seal your fate." Maren hesitated, her mind racing. If she refused, what would happen to the village? If she accepted, what would become of her? Before she could decide, a sudden burst of light filled the clearing. A group of villagers, led by Elder Rowan, emerged with torches and weapons. "Step away, Maren," Rowan shouted. "The shadows deceive you." Quote. The figure recoiled, dissolving into mist, but its voice lingered. "The choice is yours. The forest awaits." Rowan seized Maren's arm and dragged her back to the safety of the lanterns. "You're a fool," he scolded. "The forest's whispers have corrupted stronger souls than yours." Maren glanced back at the woods, where the altar and the dagger had already vanished. But the ember-eyed figure's words echoed in her mind. "The forest awaits." The next morning, Maren awoke to find her palm marked with an intricate sigil, faintly glowing and warm to the touch. No amount of scrubbing could erase it. When her mother noticed, she gasped, her face pale. "You've been marked," her mother whispered. "You must not speak of this to anyone. Especially not Rowan." "But why?" Maren demanded. Her mother's voice dropped to a trembling whisper. "There's more to our family's history than you know. The shadows, they've chosen you before." Before Maren could press for answers, a knock sounded at the door. It was Elder Rowan. He demanded Maren accompany him to the council hall, where the village's elders awaited. Inside the dimly lit hall, the elders stared at Maren with suspicion. "She's marked," Rowan said grimly. "The forest claims her. We must act before the shadows consume her." Maren's chest tightened. "Consume me? I didn't ask for this." Quote. Rowan slammed his staff on the ground. "The forest does not ask. It takes. You are a danger to us all unless the mark is removed." Before they could decide her fate, a sudden quake shook the hall. The air grew cold, and the flickering lanterns dimmed. A voice echoed through the room, deep and resonant. "The accord is broken," it proclaimed. "The forest has chosen, and its will cannot be denied." As the room descended into chaos, Maren clenched her marked hand. The forest had chosen her, but for what purpose? One thing was clear. If she wanted answers, she would have to return to the woods and face the shadows on her own. Wrapped in a heavy cloak, she slipped past the watchful eyes of the guards patrolling the forest's edge. The mark on her palm pulsed faintly, guiding her deeper into the woods than she had ever dared venture before. The forest seemed alive in ways Maren hadn't noticed before. Leaves whispered secrets in a language she couldn't understand, and the trees bent subtly, as if bowing in her presence. The shadows moved with her, not menacingly but protectively, like silent sentinels. Hours passed before she reached the clearing again. The altar had returned, along with the dagger, its black blade shimmering faintly. This time, Maren didn't hesitate. She grasped the dagger, and the moment her fingers closed around its hilt, a wave of energy surged through her. The mark on her palm burned brightly, and the figure from before materialized once more solid and defined. "You have accepted," the figure said, its ember eyes glowing. "I am Kaelin, keeper of the accord. Now, we begin." "Begin what?" Maren asked, her voice unsteady. Kaelin gestured to the forest around them. "The balance is fractured. The accord's boundaries, once held strong by the pact, are weakening. Creatures from the deep wood are stirring, and if they break through, your village will fall." Maren frowned. "But why me? I'm no warrior. I don't know how to fix this." "You are not meant to be a warrior," Kaelin replied. "You are meant to be a bridge. The mark connects you to the forest and to me. Together, we can restore the balance." Maren hesitated. She felt the weight of the dagger, the mark on her hand, and the overwhelming responsibility thrust upon her. But beneath her fear, a spark of determination ignited. "What do I need to do?" Quote. Kaelin's expression softened, and for the first time, Maren thought she saw a hint of sorrow in his glowing eyes. "You must find the 3 anchors of the accord. They are hidden deep within the forest, guarded by its oldest spirits. Only by reawakening them can the balance be restored." Kaelin led Maren deeper into the forest, the dagger glowing faintly in her hand. The air grew colder, the trees more twisted and ancient. Strange noises filled the silence, low growls, rustling leaves, and the occasional distant scream. "Stay close," Kaelin warned. "The first anchor lies within the weeping grove. But beware! The grove is haunted by a wraith, a remnant of the last guardian who failed in their duty." The weeping grove was aptly named. The trees there dripped with thick, sap-like tears that gleamed silver in the moonlight. As Maren stepped into the grove, the air grew heavy, and her breath clouded before her. A mournful wail echoed, and a figure emerged. A translucent woman in tattered robes, her eyes hollow, her expression one of endless grief. She hovered above the ground, her form flickering like a dying flame. "You seek the anchor?" the wraith rasped, her voice like wind through a broken window. "But only those who understand loss may claim it." Maren swallowed hard, gripping the dagger. "I don't understand. What loss? What do you mean?" Quote, "The wraith gestured, and the grove transformed around Maren. She stood in her village, but it was lifeless. The lanterns were extinguished, the homes reduced to ashes. Figures lay scattered, villagers she recognized, her mother among them. The vision stabbed at her heart. This is the cost of failure," the wraith said. "Can you bear this weight and still move forward?" Quote, "Tears stung Marin's eyes, but she forced herself to look at the devastation. I can't let this happen," she said, her voice firm despite her trembling. "I'll carry the weight if it means protecting them." The wraith's form flickered, her hollow eyes softening. "You have passed," she whispered. The vision faded, and in its place, a glowing crystal emerged from the base of a weeping tree. Kaelan stepped forward, his expression approving. "The first anchor is yours. 2 remain." As Maren and Kaelan made their way toward the second anchor, the forest began to change. The shadows grew deeper, and the ground seemed to pulse as if alive. "Why did the last guardian fail?" Maren asked, breaking the silence. Kaelan hesitated. "The burden of the accord is heavy. It demands more than most can give." The last guardian grew resentful, and their anger corrupted the pact. That corruption still festers in the deep wood. Before Maren could press further, a screech pierced the air. From the darkness emerged a creature unlike anything she had seen. A wolf-like beast with scales instead of fur, and glowing red eyes. Kaelan stepped forward, raising a hand. The shadows around him surged, forming a barrier between the creature and Maren. "Go," he commanded. "The path to the second anchor lies ahead. I will hold them off." Maren hesitated, her heart pounding. But she saw the determination in Kaelan's ember eyes and forced herself to run. The forest seemed to part for her, guiding her toward the second anchor. But as she ran, Maren couldn't shake the feeling that Kaelan's sorrow hid a deeper truth, one that could change everything. Maren pushed through the dense forest, her legs burning and lungs straining. The dagger pulsed in her grip, its glow growing stronger as she neared the second anchor. She came to a halt before an enormous wall of thorned vines that towered into the canopy. Each thorn was as long as her hand and glistened with a strange, dark liquid. "The labyrinth," Maren whispered. Kaelan had warned her that the second anchor was fiercely guarded, but he hadn't mentioned this. As she approached the entrance, the vines shifted, creating a narrow pathway. Hesitant but resolute, Maren stepped into the labyrinth. The moment she entered, the forest's whispers intensified, mingling with distorted voices. Shadows darted in the corners of her vision, and the path behind her closed, leaving no way out but forward. The labyrinth tested her resolve. One path led her to a chasm filled with writhing roots, another to a dead end where the air itself seemed to turn solid. As she wandered, the whispers coalesced into coherent words. "Turn back. Abandon the accord. You will only fail." Maren gritted her teeth, refusing to give in. She pressed forward, her palms scraped from climbing and her cloak torn by the sharp thorns. Finally, she emerged into a circular clearing at the heart of the labyrinth. In the center stood the second anchor, a stone monolith etched with glowing runes. But it was guarded. A hulking figure stepped into view, its body made of twisted wood and stone. Its hollow eyes burned with green light, and its movements were slow but deliberate. It was a golem, ancient and powerful, bound to protect the anchor. The creature roared, its voice like the groan of trees under a storm, and charged at Maren. Maren dove aside as the golem's massive arm smashed into the ground, leaving a crater. Scrambling to her feet, she gripped the dagger tightly, unsure how such a small weapon could harm something so massive. The golem swung again, its movements surprisingly fast for its size. Maren dodged, but the edge of its arm grazed her shoulder, sending her sprawling. Pain flared, but she forced herself to stand. You're not just a fighter, Maren reminded herself, recalling Kaelin's words. You're meant to be a bridge. Looking at the dagger, Maren noticed that its glow seemed to react to the golem's movements. As the creature lunged again, she raised the blade instinctively. A burst of dark energy erupted from the dagger, slamming into the golem and halting its attack. The creature stumbled back, but its hollow eyes narrowed, as though testing her resolve. Maren steadied herself, realizing she couldn't rely on brute force. The golem charged once more, and Maren stood her ground. As it brought its massive arm down, she leaped forward, driving the dagger into the runes glowing on its chest. The blade sank deep, and the golem froze, its green light dimming. The creature let out a low, mournful groan before crumbling into dust. Maren panted, her body trembling, but she approached the anchor with determination. She placed her marked palm against the stone. The runes flared to life, and the mark on her hand burned brightly. A surge of warmth and clarity flooded her mind, and she heard Kaelin's voice, faint but reassuring. 2 anchors restored. 1 remains. Maren left the labyrinth battered but victorious. The dagger's glow dimmed, as if satisfied for now. The forest seemed calmer, though an underlying tension lingered, like a held breath. Kaelin appeared beside her as she rested against a fallen log. You succeeded, he said, his voice filled with quiet pride. Was there any doubt? Maren teased, though her exhaustion showed. Kaelin chuckled, but his smile faltered. Each anchor brings you closer to the truth, Maren. Are you ready for what comes next? Quote. She studied him, noting the weight in his ember eyes. Kaelin, why do I feel like you're hiding something? What aren't you telling me? Quote. Kaelin turned away, his expression darkening. The forest, it's alive, Maren, but it's also wounded. The corruption of the Deepwood is tied to me. To my failure. I wasn't always the shadow you see now. Maren's breath hitched. You were the last guardian. He nodded. I let my anger consume me. I thought I could control the power of the Accord, bend it to my will. But the forest punished my arrogance, binding me to this form. Now I can only guide the next guardian, you, to fix what I destroyed. Maren felt a pang of sympathy, but also a growing unease. If Kaelin had failed, what chance did she have? What happens if I restore all the anchors? She asked. Kaelin hesitated, then answered softly, the Accord will be whole again. But its power requires balance. A sacrifice must be made. Maren's blood ran cold. What kind of sacrifice? Quote. Kaelin didn't answer, his silence heavy with implication. The path to the 3rd anchor took Maren to the forest's darkest heart. The Abyssal Vale. A place spoken of only in fearful whispers. Even Kaelin seemed reluctant to approach. His shadowy form flickering uneasily as they neared the edge of a chasm shrouded in impenetrable mist. The final anchor lies below, Kaelin said, his voice tinged with regret. But the Deepwood's corruption is strongest here. You will face its full force. Maren peered into the abyss, her heart pounding. The mist writhed as though alive, obscuring whatever horrors lurked within. Yet the mark on her palm pulsed with a warmth that steadied her resolve. I've come this far, she said firmly. Whatever's down there, I'll face it. Kaelin nodded solemnly. The veil will test you, Maren. It knows your fears, your doubts. But remember, you carry the strength of the forest now. Trust in it, and in yourself. Taking a deep breath, Maren stepped into the mist. The world around her shifted instantly, the air growing heavy and cold. Shadows coiled and twisted, forming vague, monstrous shapes that whispered her name in cruel, mocking tones. Unworthy, they hissed. Foolish child. You will fail, just as he did. Maren pressed on, gripping the dagger tightly. The mist parted briefly, revealing fleeting visions. Her village engulfed in flames. Her mother's lifeless form. The elders condemning her as a harbinger of doom. The images cut deep, but Maren refused to falter. This isn't real, she muttered, her voice breaking. It's just the veil trying to break me. But then, a new figure emerged. Kaelan, in his shadowy form, standing before her. You shouldn't have come, he said, his ember eyes cold and unfeeling. You'll only make things worse. The forest doesn't need a hero. It needs a sacrifice. Maren's resolve wavered, doubt creeping into her heart. Was he right? Was she only making things worse? Suddenly, the mark on her palm flared, dispelling the shadows momentarily. The warmth reminded her of her purpose. The village. The forest. The fragile balance she was fighting to protect. You're not Kaelan, Maren said, raising the dagger. And I won't let you stop me. The false Kaelan lunged at her, but Maren's strike was swift. The dagger cut through the shadow, which dissolved into mist with a shriek. As the shadows retreated, Maren found herself in a vast cavern illuminated by a faint, sickly green light. In the center stood the final anchor. A massive tree with withered branches and blackened roots. Its trunk carved with ancient runes. The corruption was unmistakable, oozing from the tree like poison. Kaelan materialized beside her, his form weak and flickering. This is it, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. The heart of the accord, and the source of the corruption I unleashed. Maren approached the tree cautiously, but as she raised the dagger, the ground trembled. From the roots emerged a monstrous figure. A towering, twisted amalgamation of bark, shadow, and bone. Its eyes glowed with the same sickly green light, and its voice was a guttural roar. You will not restore the accord, it bellowed. The forest belongs to the deep wood now. Quote. The creature lashed out, its massive claws tearing through the air. Maren dove to the side, the force of the strike shaking the cavern. Kaelan stepped forward, shadows swirling around him. Maren, you must reach the anchor, he shouted. I'll hold it off. Quote. No, Maren yelled, fear tightening her chest. You don't have to do this alone. Quote. Kaelan turned to her, his ember eyes burning with fierce determination. I've made my mistakes. Let me atone for them. Go. Quote. As Kaelan engaged the monstrous guardian, Maren sprinted toward the tree. The corruption seemed to fight her every step, the air thick with malice and despair. But she pushed forward, her marked palm glowing brighter with each step. Maren reached the tree and placed her palm against its withered bark. The runes on the trunk flared to life, and a surge of energy coursed through her. The dagger pulsed in her other hand, resonating with the anchor's power. The cavern shook violently, and the monstrous guardian let out a final roar as Kaelan's shadows overwhelmed it. But as the anchor's light grew, Kaelan collapsed to his knees, his form flickering like a dying flame. The balance requires a sacrifice, he murmured, his voice faint. I am bound to the corruption. If the accord is to be restored, I must be unbound. Maren's heart clenched. There has to be another way, she said, tears streaming down her face. You fought so hard for this. Kaelan gave her a sad smile. That's why it must be me. You've done your part, Maren. Now let me do mine. Before she could protest, Kaelan placed his hand over hers on the tree. The mark on her palm flared, and the shadows that made up Kaelan's form began to dissolve. Thank you, he said softly, his ember eyes dimming. Live well, Maren, and protect the accord? With a final burst of light, the corruption was purged. The tree's withered branches blossomed with vibrant leaves. and the cavern filled with a warm, golden glow. Kaelin was gone. Maren emerged from the forest to find the village untouched, the lanterns burning brightly, and the oppressive weight of the shadows lifted. The mark on her palm remained, now a faint, silvery glow, a reminder of the pact she had fulfilled. The villagers greeted her with a mix of awe and reverence, though Elder Rowan's expression was tinged with guilt. "You've done what none of us could," he said quietly. "The forest is at peace again." Maren nodded but said nothing. Her heart ached for Kaelin, for the sacrifices made to restore the balance. As the new guardian of the Accord, Maren knew her journey was far from over. The forest was alive, and its whispers now spoke to her, not in fear but in trust. She looked to the trees, where shadows danced in the dappled sunlight. For the first time, they felt like allies rather than enemies. And as Maren walked toward the woods, the dagger at her side and the mark on her palm glowing faintly, she vowed to honor the shadow and light within her, and the memory of the one who had shown her the way. The story ends here, but countless others await in the vast expanse of imagination. Subscribe to Storylight for more journeys into the unknown. See you on the next adventure.